This was never about revenge. It was about justice. The moment Connor Riley's saliva hit my face at my wife's company party, I knew exactly how this was going to end. Not well for him. "She's mine at work, Keller." "Wait your turn," he said, that smug Boston accent dripping with entitlement as he straightened his thousand tie. The entire tech company's executive floor had gone silent. 30-odd people pretending to study their champagne flutes while watching the show. My wife Lena stood 3 feet away, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the office lighting, wearing that black dress I bought her for our anniversary. She didn't even flinch, just sipped her wine and watched me get humiliated like it was Tuesday night television. "By tonight, darling," she said to me, her voice carrying the cold edge I'd been hearing more and more lately. "Connor's been working late on some very important projects." I wiped the spit off my cheek with my sleeve, feeling the eyes of every HR manager, software engineer, and marketing drone boring into me. These people knew Lena as the sharp, ambitious head of human resources who'd climbed from intern to executive in 5 years. They knew Connor as her boss, the vice president of operations with the corner office, and the Porsche in the executive parking spot. They had no idea who I was. "Well," I said, forcing that familiar, self-deprecating smile. "I wouldn't want to interfere with important work. Connor, you should probably get back to it. Don't forget to tell the director about tonight." Connor's laugh boomed across the office space. "The director? Kid, I am the director around here. Lena's told me all about you. Some middle management nobody who can't even keep his wife interested." "That's right," I said quietly, pulling out my phone. "Just remember, I suggested you tell him." The party went back to its awkward murmur of conversations. Lena disappeared with Connor toward his office. I grabbed my coat and headed for the elevator, nodding to the security guard, who gave me a knowing look. "Evening, Mr. Keller," Artie Russo said, his thick Boston accent warm compared to Connor's sneer. "Rough night." "Just getting started, Artie. Just getting started." I drove home to our house in Brooklyn. Well, my house now, I suppose. The mortgage was in my name, after all. Everything was in my name, actually. But Lena had never bothered to ask why a middle management nobody could afford a 4-bedroom colonial inn in one of Boston's pricier suburbs. The house felt different that night. Empty. Not because Lena wasn't there. She'd been working late more nights than not for the past 6 months. It felt empty because I finally understood what I was looking at. The end of something that had been dead for a while. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my home office staring at the framed photo of our wedding day. Lena looked radiant. I looked happy. We looked like people who actually liked each other. My phone buzzed. Text from Lena. "Staying at Julia's tonight. We need to talk tomorrow." Julia Voss, her best friend and the company's PR director. Another climber. Another schemer. I'd never liked Julia with her fake laugh and the way she looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. I texted back and sure thing, "I'll be here." Then I opened my laptop and started making some calls. Not many people have the director of Pinnacle Technology's personal cell phone number. I'm one of the few who do. "Evening, Mr. Roth," I said when he picked up on the second ring. "Van, my boy, how did the little experiment go tonight?" "Exactly as predicted." Connor took the bait completely. "Lena, too." "Excellent. I assume you're ready to proceed with phase 2. I looked at that wedding photo again. 5 years of marriage, 2 years of her cheating, 6 months of me knowing about it and gathering evidence. Tonight was just the public humiliation I needed to justify what came next. More than ready, sir. It's time they learned who really runs that company. Goodman. I'll see you in the office tomorrow, bright and early. I hung up and finished my bourbon. Tomorrow, Lena and Connor would discover that the middle management nobody they'd been screwing over, literally and figuratively, was actually the one person in the company they couldn't afford to cross. The person who'd been managing Pinnacle's most sensitive operations for 3 years while Mr. Roth stayed in the shadows. The person who knew every dirty secret, every questionable deal, every corner they'd cut to make their numbers look good. The person who'd been waiting very patiently for them to give him a reason to destroy them both. I went to bed alone that night, but I wasn't lonely. I was planning. Lena came home the next morning looking like she'd slept in her dress, which she probably had at Connor's place. Her makeup was smudged, her hair was a mess, and she had that particular walk of someone who'd had a very long night. "We need to talk," she said, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter like she was dropping a bomb. "Coffee first?" I asked, holding up the pot. "You look like you could use some." "Don't be cute, Evan. This isn't cute time." Evan, she only called me Evan when she was about to do something she thought would hurt me. Most people called me Van, short for my middle name, Vance. Lena used to call me Van, too, back when she actually liked me. "All right," I said, pouring myself a cup. "Talk." She pulled out a manila envelope, the kind lawyers use maybe for important documents. "I want a divorce." "Okay." She blinked. "Okay, sure. Makes sense. You're sleeping with your boss. You clearly don't want to be married anymore. And honestly, Lena, I'm tired of pretending this is working." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. This wasn't going the way she'd planned. She'd probably expected tears, begging, maybe some dramatic plea for counseling. "I've already filed the papers. My lawyer says with your income versus mine, you'll probably have to pay alimony." I almost laughed. My income. If she only knew. "What income are we talking about exactly?" I asked. "Don't play dumb. Your salary at Morrison Marketing." Morrison Marketing was my cover job. Nice little firm downtown where I officially worked as a senior account manager making a respectable but unremarkable $70,000 a year. What Lena didn't know was that Morrison Marketing was wholly owned by a subsidiary of Pinnacle Technologies and my real salary came from an entirely different source. Right. Morrison Marketing. I signed the papers without reading them. "There you go. You're not even going to fight this." "Fight what?" "You want out, you're out." "I'm not going to force someone to stay married to me, Lena. I have some dignity left." She looked almost disappointed. Like she'd been gearing up for a battle, and I just surrendered before the first round. "Connor's going to help me find a new place," she said. "I'm sure he is very generous of him. He's a good man, Evan. Better than you ever were." Now, that did make me smile. "I'm sure you're right. Connor seems like exactly the kind of man you deserve." She grabbed the signed papers and headed for the door. "I'll come by later this week for my things." "Take your time. I'll be at work." After she left, I called in sick to Morrison Marketing. Not that anyone there would miss me. And drove to Pinnacle's headquarters in downtown Boston. 40-story glass tower. Connor's corner office on the 38th floor. Executive parking garage with assigned spaces. I parked in my usual spot in the basement level. Not the executive level. That would have blown my cover years ago. Just a regular employee spot that happened to have direct elevator access to Mr. Roth's private office on the 40th floor. Artie was waiting for me at the security desk. "Heard you had some excitement last night," he said, his weathered face creasing into a grin. Ex-Boston PD, 25 years on the force before Mr. Roth hired him to run security. Artie was one of the few people who knew exactly who I was and what I did. Word travels fast. Julia Voss has been calling everyone she knows, telling them about how Connor put you in your place. Says Lena's finally trading up to a real man. Is that what she's saying? That's the polite version. Want to hear the real version? Save it for later. I have work to do. The elevator to Mr. Roth's office required a special key card. I was one of 3 people who had one. Mr. Roth himself, his personal assistant Margaret, and me. Van. Margaret smiled as I walked into the outer office. "I heard congratulations are in order for the divorce, for finally getting to drop the act. I know how much you've hated playing the nobody." Margaret had been with Mr. Roth for 15 years. She knew where all the bodies were buried, sometimes literally. She also made the best coffee in Boston and had a grandmother's way of making you feel better about whatever horrible thing you were about to do to someone who deserved it. "Is he in? Waiting for you." And Van, he's excited. I haven't seen him this excited about a project in years. Roth's office took up half the 40th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. Antique desk that probably cost more than most people's cars, and walls lined with photos of him shaking hands with senators, governors, and CEOs of companies you'd definitely recognize. Van, my boy. He stood up as I entered. A small, sharp-eyed man in his 70s who'd built Pinnacle Technologies from a 2% startup into a billion-dollar empire. How are you feeling? Like Christmas morning, sir. Excellent. Margaret, hold my calls. Van and I have some planning to do. For the next 2 hours, we went over the details. Connor's financial irregularities, the expense reports that didn't quite add up, the vendor contracts that seemed to favor companies where he had personal connections, Lena's HR violations, the complaints she'd buried, the settlements she'd authorized without board approval, the way she'd been using her position to eliminate anyone who might threaten her rise. Julia's embezzlement was almost laughably small. A few $1,000s in fake expense reports over 2 years, but embezzlement was embezzlement. And in the corporate world, it was a career butcher. The beautiful thing, Mr. Roth said, is that everything we're going to do to them is completely legal, completely justified, and completely devastating. When do we start? Today, I'm calling an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. By 5 o'clock, the 3 of them will be suspended pending investigation. By the end of the week, they'll be unemployed and unemployable. And Lena will discover that her new divorce settlement isn't quite what she thought it would be. Turns out her husband isn't the nobody she thought he was. I smiled. This is going to be fun, Van. In 30 years of business, I've learned one important lesson. Never underestimate the satisfaction of watching arrogant people get exactly what they deserve. The Pinnacle Technologies emergency board meeting was called for 4 o'clock. By 3:30, word had spread through the office that something big was happening. Connor, Lena, and Julia were all summoned to the 39th floor conference room. I wasn't invited to the meeting officially. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Roth began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built empires. We have some serious issues to address. I watched from the observation room next door, a little-known feature of the conference room that Mr. Roth had installed years ago for exactly these situations. Artie sat beside me munching popcorn like we were at the movies. This is better than Netflix, he whispered. Connor sat at the head of the table like he owned the place. Lena was to his right, perfectly composed in a fresh outfit and new makeup. Julia flanked Lena's other side, the 3 of them presenting a united front against whatever crisis they thought they were about to weather together. The 7 board members looked grim. They'd been briefed an hour earlier. It has come to our attention, Mr. Roth continued, that there have been serious violations of company policy, financial irregularities, and potential criminal activity within our executive ranks. Connor straightened up. Sir, if this is about the Henderson contract, I can explain. Mr. Riley, you'll have your chance to speak. Right now, I'm talking. Mr. Roth's voice could have cut glass. Over the past 6 months, our internal audit team has discovered a pattern of expense fraud, vendor kickbacks, and HR violations that trace directly to this table. Lena's face went pale. Julia started fidgeting with her pen. The Henderson contract is just the beginning, Mr. Riley. There's also the Brennan Group deal, the software licensing agreement with Coastal Systems, and the very interesting consulting payments to Emerald City Solutions, a company that upon investigation appears to exist solely to funnel money into your personal accounts. That's ridiculous, Connor said, but his voice had lost its swagger. I don't know what kind of information you're getting, but the information comes from our Director of Special Operations who has been investigating these irregularities for the past 18 months. All 3 of them looked around the table trying to figure out which board member was the mysterious director they'd never heard of. Miss Grant Keller Roth turned to Lena. Your department has settled 17 misconduct harassment complaints in the past 2 years without board approval. Authorized payments totaling over $200,000 and systematically eliminated any employee who raised concerns about executive conduct. Lena's composure cracked. Those were legitimate HR decisions made to protect the company from what? Accountability, justice, or just from having to explain why you were covering for your lover's behavior. The room went dead silent. And Ms. Voss, Mr. Roth's attention shifted to Julia. Your creative expense reporting might seem small compared to your colleagues' activities, but fraud is fraud. Fake conference fees, phantom client dinners, and my personal favorite, billing the company for your weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard as a team-building exercise. When the only team involved was you and your yoga instructor, Julia looked like she was going to be sick. Now, Roth said, I'd like you all to meet the person who uncovered this information. He pressed the intercom button. Van, would you join us, please? I walked into the conference room enjoying the looks of absolute shock on their faces. Connor's mouth actually fell open. Lena looked like she'd seen a ghost. Julia just stared. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Evan Vance Keller, our Director of Special Operations. Van has been with Pinnacle for 3 years, reporting directly to me on matters of internal security, competitive intelligence, and executive oversight. I took a seat at the opposite end of the table from Connor, directly across from my soon-to-be ex-wife. Hello, Lena, I said pleasantly. Connor, Julia. Lovely to see you all again. This is impossible, Connor sputtered. He's nobody. He works at some marketing firm downtown. Morrison Marketing is a Pinnacle subsidiary, I explained. My cover position gives me freedom to move around the city, meet with contacts, and investigate our competitors and our employees. You son of a witch, Lena whispered. You've been spying on us. I've been doing my job. The fact that my job involved documenting your crimes is just a happy coincidence. Mr. Roth stood up. All 3 of you are suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. Security will escort you out. You have until Friday to clean out your offices. You can't do this, Connor said, finally finding his voice. I have contracts, obligations. You had contracts. You had obligations. Now you have lawyers to call. Mr. Roth smiled coldly. The meeting is adjourned. Artie appeared in the doorway with 2 other security guards. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd come with us, please. As they were escorted out, Lena turned back to look at me. The expression on her face was pure hatred. This isn't over, Evan. Actually, I said, it is, but thank you for an interesting 5 years of marriage. I learned a lot. After they left, Mr. Roth poured 2 glasses of scotch from the bar in his office. Phase 1 complete, he said, handing me a glass. Phase 1. Van, my boy, did you really think I was going to let them off with just losing their jobs? After what they did to you last night? After the way they've been treating our employees? After the way they've been stealing from this company? I sipped the scotch. It was older than I was and probably cost more per ounce than most people made per hour. What did you have in mind? Revenge, Van. Cold, calculated, absolutely devastating revenge. The kind that ruins lives permanently. I'm listening. By tomorrow morning, every major company in Boston will know exactly why they were fired. Their professional reputations will be destroyed. But that's just the beginning. He walked to his desk and pulled out a thick file. Connor's been living beyond his means for years. His penthouse, his car, his lifestyle, it's all leveraged to the hilt. When the banks find out he's unemployed and unemployable, they'll call in everything. He'll lose it all. And Lena will discover that her divorce settlement is based on your official Morrison Marketing salary, not your real income. She'll also find that the joint accounts she thought she was entitled to half of don't actually exist in the way she thinks they do. What about Julia? Julia will find that her little embezzlement problem has been reported to the FBI. White-collar crime van federal charges. Even if she doesn't go to prison, she'll never work in corporate America again. I finished my scotch and set down the glass. When do we start phase 2? Mr. Roth smiled. We already have. By Friday morning, Boston's corporate community was buzzing with the news. Pinnacle Technologies had fired 3 executives for fraud, embezzlement, and ethics violations. The story made the business section of the Globe with quotes from sources close to the investigation about the scope of the misconduct. Julia was the first to crack. She showed up at my house Thursday night crying and begging. Van, please, she sobbed on my doorstep. I know we've had our differences, but you have to help me. The FBI called today. They wanted to interview me about expense report fraud. That sounds serious, I said, not inviting her in. It was only a few thousand over 2 years. Everybody does it. You know how corporate expenses work. Actually, Julia, I don't. I've always been very careful about my expense reports. Accurate to the penny. Please. I'll lose everything. My job, my reputation, maybe even go to prison. All for a few dinners and a weekend trip. You should have thought about that before you stole from the company. I wasn't stealing. I was just creative with the categories. That's literally the definition of stealing, Julia. She tried a different approach. What if I told you things about Lena? Things you don't know. Like what? Like how she's been planning to leave you for over a year. Like how she and Connor have been laughing about you, calling you pathetic, making jokes about how easy you were to fool. Tell me something I don't already know. She's pregnant. That stopped me cold. What? 2 months. She doesn't know if it's yours or Connor's, but she's hoping it's his. She wants to start fresh with a real man, she said. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not jealousy. I was long past that. But the idea that Lena might be carrying Connor's child while still legally married to me opened up some very unpleasant legal complications. Thanks for the information, Julia. I'll keep it in mind. Will you help me? No. I closed the door and immediately called my lawyer. If Lena was pregnant, I needed to make sure the divorce was finalized before the baby was born, or I could end up legally responsible for Connor's child. Friday afternoon, I was sitting in Flanagan's pub, the bar 3 blocks from Pinnacle, where all the office gossip flowed like beer, when Connor walked in. He looked like he'd aged 5 years and 5 days. His usually perfect hair was messy. His expensive suit was wrinkled. And he had the hollow-eyed look of a man who hadn't been sleeping. He spotted me at the bar and walked over. You destroyed my life, he said, sitting down on the stool next to me. You destroyed your own life, I replied, not looking up for my beer. I just documented it. 3 years I've been building my career at that company. 3 years of 80-hour weeks of making my numbers of delivering results. 3 years of stealing line and inappropriately harassing your employees. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. I have recordings, Connor. Video surveillance, bank records, email trails. You want to know what really happened? You got lazy and arrogant and you thought nobody was watching. He ordered a whiskey, downed it in one gulp, and ordered another. Lena's pregnant, he said. So I heard. It might be yours. It's not. How can you be sure? I turned to look at him directly for the first time since he'd sat down. Because Lena and I haven't had love in 8 months, which coincidentally is about how long you two have been sleeping together. His face went white. How did you know, Connor? I've known about the affair since it started. I know about the hotel rooms, the weekend trips, the late-night meetings in your office. I know about the burner phone she bought to text you. I know about the credit card she opened to buy lingerie she never wore home. Then why didn't you say anything? Because I was gathering evidence for the divorce and because I was building a case against both of you for corporate misconduct. Ending 2 birds with 1 stone, you might say. He stared into his whiskey like it might have answers. She doesn't want the baby, he said quietly. What? Lena, she doesn't want the baby. Says. It would ruin her career prospects, make her look unstable to potential employers. She wants to end the pregnancy and pretend none of this ever happened. I felt a twist of something, not quite sympathy, but recognition. Lena had always been practical about inconvenient realities. What do you want? I want my life back. I want my job back. I want to wake up tomorrow and discover this was all a nightmare. Not going to happen. The banks are calling in my loans. I'm going to lose the penthouse. The car, everything. I can't find another job. Every company in Boston knows why I was fired. Consequences, Connor. Actions have them. He finished his second whiskey and stood up. This isn't over. Actually, it is. But if you want to make it worse for yourself, feel free to try. He left without another word. I finished my beer and walked outside to find Artie waiting by my car. Boss wants to see you, he said. Says it's time for the final phase. What's the final phase? Artie grinned. The part where we make sure they never forget who they messed with. The final phase began on Monday morning with a phone call from Lena's lawyer. "Mr. Keller, we need to discuss a revision to the divorce settlement." "What kind of revision?" "It's come to our attention that your financial situation may be more complex than originally disclosed. We'd like to depose you regarding your actual income and assets." I almost laughed. "Sure. When and where?" "This Thursday at 10 a.m., our office is downtown." "I'll be there." I hung up and called Mr. Roth. "They're fishing," I told him. "Perfect. Let them fish. By Thursday, they'll have a much bigger problems to worry about." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that involve federal investigators, IRS audits, and criminal charges." "Van, did you know that Connor's been claiming his penthouse as a business expense for the past 2 years? Tax fraud, among other things. And Lena's been using company resources for personal matters. The private investigator she hired to follow you was paid for with Pinnacle funds. She had me followed for 6 months, trying to find dirt for the divorce. Ironically, if she'd been better at it, she might have discovered who you really were before it was too late." Tuesday morning brought news that Julie had been arrested. Federal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement. Her mug shot was in the Globe's online edition by noon. Wednesday, Connor's penthouse went into foreclosure. The bank had moved faster than anyone expected, seizing his assets and freezing his accounts. He was effectively homeless overnight. Thursday morning, I sat in the conference room at Lena's lawyer's office, facing my soon-to-be ex-wife across a mahogany table. She looked tired but determined, like a general planning one last desperate battle. "Mr. Keller," her lawyer began, "we have reason to believe you've been hiding assets and income from this proceeding." "What reason is that?" "Your lifestyle doesn't match your reported income. The house, the cars, the way you live, it suggests additional revenue streams." I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "You're absolutely right." Lena's eyes widened as she opened the folder and saw my real employment contract with Pinnacle Technologies. The salary figures, the stock options, the bonuses. $300,000 a year, she whispered, plus benefits and equity participation. Plus performance bonuses, I added. Last year was a very good year. Her lawyer was frantically taking notes. Why wasn't this disclosed in the original filing? Because the original filing was based on my cover position at Morrison Marketing. My real job requires a certain level of discretion. What kind of job requires that level of discretion? Corporate intelligence, industrial espionage, internal investigations, the kind of work that requires people to think you're nobody important. Lena was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "You're a spy. Corporate spy. I investigate competitors, uncover industrial espionage, and root out internal threats to the company. People like executives who steal money and misuse their employees." "You son of a witch," she said quietly. "You played me for 5 years. "No, Lena. I loved you for 5 years. I played you for 6 months after I found out about the affair." Her lawyer cleared his throat. "Given this new information, we'll need to recalculate the settlement." "Actually," I said, "you won't." I pulled out another folder. "Lena forfeits any claim to alimony or asset division due to adultery." It's right there in the prenup she signed. "We never signed a prenup," Lena said. "Check page 15 of your employment contract with Pinnacle Technologies. The morality clause. Any employee who commits adultery with another employee forfeits spousal support in divorce proceedings. You signed it 3 years ago." Her face went white as she realized what I was saying. "You bastard. You planned this whole thing." "No, I planned for the possibility that you might cheat on me with a coworker. I never planned for you to be stupid enough to do it with someone who was also stealing from the company." The meeting ended with Lena getting nothing except her personal possessions and a very expensive lesson about reading contracts before signing them. That afternoon, Mr. Roth called me into his office. "Van, I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "How would you feel about a promotion? Director of Corporate Security, your own floor, your own team, a significant salary increase." "What's the catch?" "No catch. You've proven you can handle complex operations with discretion and effectiveness. I need someone I can trust to run the security division. What about maintaining my cover? We'll create a new cover. Something that gives you even more freedom to operate. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I accept. Excellent. There's just one more thing we need to take care of. What's that? Connor's been making threats against you, against the company. Art's been keeping an eye on him. And frankly, we're concerned he might do something stupid. How stupid? The kind of stupid that involves breaking into your house or vandalizing company property. The desperate kind of stupid. What do you want me to do about it? Mr. Roth smiled. I want you to give him the opportunity to hang himself completely. That night, I went home to my empty house and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 2 a.m., my security system detected movement in the backyard. The cameras showed 2 figures, Connor and another man I didn't recognize, trying to jimmy the lock on my back door. I called Artie. They're here. Police. Not yet. Let's see what they're planning first. I watched from my bedroom window as they broke into my house. They were looking for something. Going through my home office, searching my computer, rifling through my files. They weren't going to find anything incriminating because there wasn't anything to find. But what they were doing was felony breaking and entering captured in high definition by 6 different security cameras. After 20 minutes, they gave up and left. I called the police. This is Evan Keller at 47 Maple Street. I'd like to report a break-in. The police arrived within 10 minutes. I gave them the security footage, a list of what the intruders had touched, and a very good description of both men. Do you know who might have done this? The officer asked. I have an idea, I said. My ex-wife's boyfriend. We've been having some difficulties. By Friday morning, Connor was in jail, breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and violation of a restraining order I'd filed the day before. His bail was set at $50,000, money he no longer had. Lena came to see me that afternoon. Get him out of jail, she demanded, standing on my front porch like an avenging angel. Can't help you there, I said. I didn't put him in jail. He put himself in jail by breaking into my house. You set him up. I went to bed in my own house. He chose to break in. That's not a setup. That's just stupidity. He's desperate, Evan. He's lost everything. He stole from the company, Lena. He inappropriately harassed employees. He committed crimes. The fact that there were consequences doesn't make him a victim. What about the baby? What about it? It's yours. I looked at her for a long moment. No, it's not. How can you be sure? Because I had a vasectomy 2 years ago, Lena, right after you started talking about wanting children, and I realized I didn't want them with you. The color drained from her face. That's impossible. Check with Dr. Morrison at Mass General. I'm sure he has records. She sat down heavily on my front step. You've thought of everything. I've been careful. There's a difference. So, what happens now? Now you and Connor figure out your own lives. You have a baby to think about and he has a criminal record to deal with. Neither of those things is my problem anymore. You really hate us, don't you? I considered the question seriously. No, I don't hate you. I'm disappointed in you. I'm angry at how you treated me and how you treated other people, but I don't hate you. Then why destroy us so completely? 'Cause you needed to learn that actions have consequences. Because other people needed to see that there's a price for treating people badly. And because I could. She stood up and walked toward her car. Not the BMW she used to drive, but a 10-year-old Honda. That was probably all she could afford now. I hope you're happy, she called back. I'm getting there, I said. That evening, I sat in my backyard with a beer in my phone, scrolling through the news. Julia had pleaded guilty to federal charges and was looking at 2 years in prison. Connor was still in jail, unable to make bail. Lena had moved back in with her parents and was working as a temp at a law firm downtown. My phone rang. Mr. Roth. Van, how are you feeling? Satisfied, I said. Completely satisfied. Good, because I have another assignment for you. It seems we have some issues with our Seattle office. I smiled and took another sip of beer. I'm listening. 6 months later, I was sitting in that same backyard when Artie stopped by with news. Thought you'd want to know, he said, accepting a beer from my cooler. Connor got out of prison last week. How's he doing? Living in a halfway house in Dorchester, working at a gas station. Lena won't see him. Apparently, she blames him for everything that happened. And the baby born healthy. She's raising it alone, still living with her parents. Julia gets out next month. Think any of them learned anything? Artie grinned. Does it matter? They'll never forget who they messed with. I raised my beer in a toast to consequences. 2 consequences. Artie agreed. That night, I went to bed in my own house, my own bed, completely alone and completely at peace. Lena had said she wanted to be with a real man, someone better than me. She got exactly what she asked for and exactly what she deserved. Sometimes the underdog doesn't just bite back. Sometimes the underdog turns out to have been the alpha all along, just waiting for the right moment to remind everyone who's really in charge. I never saw any of them again. I didn't need to. The lesson had been taught. The score had been settled. And justice had been served exactly the way it should be. Cold, complete, and absolutely final.